Today we are recording live from the International Leadership Association Conference in Atlanta, and I am joined by Mike Hardy. He's the founding director for the Center for Trust, Peace, and Social Relations at Coventry University in the UK. So why does that fit in a leadership conference?
In my travels and in my passion to promote the issues of trust in the contemporary turbulence that we have, I travel widely and we're welcomed all over the place. And I traveled to Phoenix, Arizona, and I met amazing Professor Mansour Javidan at the Thunderbird School. And we just spent a morning discussing how his work in cultural difference and global mindset, in how people can be very, very closed in their perspectives and that. And my work, it just worked really well. And about 6 months later, and it happens like this, I had a call to say, Mike, why don't you have a look at the ILA, have a look at the International Leadership Association, get involved. We'd love you to think about being on the board. Well, this is really bizarre because I'm not a leadership scholar. I suppose the telling thing for me was that both Mansour and Cynthia Cherry, the president, were just very clear. We're interested in the ILA in leadership. So we need scholars, we need practitioners, we need teachers, consultants, coaches, but we also need leaders. That was their sell. That was their pitch. Mike, you're a great leader. Whether I am or not is irrelevant. And the more I've been involved now, without savvy leaders, we're stuck. It is going to be leadership which changes. So the world we're in, as I've said to you, and I get boring, is a real mess. And part of the reason for that mess, I believe, is that the quality of our leaders is just a bit lacking.
We have the same mantra. Well, and for me, the idea of innovating how we lead, we innovate our mass transit, we innovate our light bulbs, yet the people doing the work of leadership are not innovating themselves at the same rate they're innovating the stuff.
That's right. And it's not just big leaders right at the top. The notion, and I've learned very quickly, the ILA is really interested in mobilizing the concept of leadership at all levels.
So lead self.
Yes, so you're a leader, I'm a leader, but also our juniors are leaders. People, the new generations are leaders, and we can empower small people, not pejoratively small, but small people because they're to be leaders, to lead us out of this mess. Then my good friend Ira Shalif, who's also written a lot about followership and how, we need to take stock of how we follow as well as how we lead. We've heard great keynotes at this particular conference, which has stressed to us the importance of listening, the importance of dialogue. And that's mainstream, the work I do in my first study center.
Just thinking of followership and the idea that our model has 7 competencies for Leader 2050, and one of them is inspiring followership. And part of that is knowing when I need to follow, right? When I'm in a room with someone who's significantly more competent in an area, even though I may be the formal leader, they step in, and that's as it should be.
But the power of that person is limited unless our followers enter this dialogue and enter the discussion knowing they'll leave as leaders. I have to say I disagree sometimes with Ira about the power of followership, but I want us to move really quickly. In my center, I have 70 academics. We have a very flat structure. I hope I'm an inspirational leader. They give me the authority to lead because I deliver to them the space to be excellent stewards. And that relationship, but I don't see them as followers. I see them as leaders in their own right. The best leaders are those who create other leaders and who empower and entrust and so forth.
Well, and then the other is we lead differently with different groups.
Yeah.
So you lead differently there than you probably have in other places in life.
I think so. When I was in the Foreign Service, I was in a bureaucracy of public bureaucracy of civil service, very hierarchical. And it was really difficult to do what I'm describing, this empowering, this entrusting, this enabling. But we did it anyway, because that's as you do, don't you?
Well, some of us do.
Why do we let the legacy of years of civil service get in the way?
Well, actually, I did an interview recently. One of the pieces of work I do as a student of Jim Ritchie-Dunn, he's an adjunct researcher at Harvard, and we evaluate pockets within organizations. And what we're seeing is pockets led by people who are progressive can be highly vibrant, even if the organization is relatively sick.
Yeah.
So let's get to your passion, though.
Okay.
What do you want to share?
you need to make a difference. You need to leave some implant. It's this footprint in the sand, and the sea comes very quickly and washes it away. What my passion is that I believe that the 21st century is a relationship age.
Okay.
And unless we look more carefully at behavior within relationships, we're going to miss several plots. When I look at relationships, I analyze this difference between the forces for prejudice in the world and the forces for pluralism in a nutshell. So I want to mobilize understanding, mobilize scholarship, practice that promotes pluralism, promotes our comfort as people to live in complex, diverse communities and live peacefully.
And why, as a leader, should I care about that?
Because without these basic behavioral things going on, without people stepping up and presenting themselves as comfortable in a difficult, complex, plural world, leaders will spend all their time regulating, all their time policing, creating frameworks in which they would set behaviors. So we'll have a top-down world of rules and regulations that keep us safe, rather than the bottom-up world of behaviors that keep us safe. Now, which is going to be the better and more effective? Which is going to be the least cost of effective way of doing it? You and I, we're very different people. We can sit and have a good relationship, and you can start to be judgmental, to put up barriers, to say, well, she talks funny, she's got this funny accent, and she comes from this funny place called the United States, and Mike's very stiff and formal. If we mobilize aspects of our identity to create difference, rather than to mobilize aspects of identity to be comfortable with the space that difference needs, we're on the loser, basically.
We both have an economics background. So what comes to me is that by rejecting or distancing myself from people, but specifically a lot of what's happening in our world right now, I'm limiting the number of perspectives I can accept into my organization. Those people that have different things on their heads or wear scarves or do something seem scary. So we don't include them. Then my population is smaller. And I'm eliminating a large percentage of the world, global population. One of our conversations yesterday was with AJ talking about migration. So as we're having the conversation, I'm thinking more global. If a listener is sitting in Columbus, Ohio, where I live, it's also about, do I reject people from Michigan, the other football team?
Sure.
And am I eliminating folks that are bright because they're different, either in the external physical features or something about their perspective?
So in Europe at the moment, we have what the media calls, and politicians, a crisis of migration. We have a crisis of refugees, millions of people, not small numbers, fleeing the most appalling conflict and doing what you and I would do, seeking safety for your family. It's very, very
Basic need.
a basic need.
Yeah.
The consequence of which is that we now have a crisis. Now, what's the nature of the crisis? And it's very interesting. The nature of the crisis is, how do these 2.6, I think it is, millions of people
In Europe now.
arrived in Europe? This is just in Europe, not those that are still stuck in Lebanon or Jordan. How do we integrate them? How do we accept them? How do we welcome them when the world generally finds prejudice much easier to do? Like, these guys are taking my jobs, they're taking my health services, they're taking my school places, and it's very easy for you to see how the forces for prejudice can be mobilized. So the real crisis in Europe is not large numbers of migrants. It's how do we cope as a people with absorbing, with welcoming? How do we create the space in Europe, which we have, to allow these people refuge? Do you know, the research we're doing in my center, the scholarship, just to be boring with it, is one of the first major studies of discussions led by Professor Crawley, who's amazing. And what her project has done is spoken to 500 or 600 refugees as they arrive on beaches in Malta, in Italy, in Greece. As they arrive with a clinger to their
All their
families.
possessions probably in their hand.
And as they arrive, and they've lost people on the way because thousands died on the travel. So it's a pretty traumatic. But she asked a question, among many others in those interviews, about what did you bring with you? When you left Aleppo, when you left Mosul, when you left Eritrea, and you got on this journey of securing safety. And it's really interesting. What would you think people would bring with them?
Family.
Yeah, you bring your people, your kids, the door key,
Oh, wow.
Big thing, isn't it? So when in Europe we worry about, as we should, about how to accommodate, how to integrate, can we afford them? Realize these people aren't coming as interventionists. They're not coming as migrants who tend to stay. They're coming because they can't go home. And I think what we're learning is that if we dealt with the drivers of the movement rather than the movement, what's the causes of people moving in this mass transit way? We'd be better off. And I think if we could solve and create safe communities, people would go home, just as I do, just as I go home. I go home because it's great. It's my base and it's safe, it's secure, and I can rest.
And your people are there, right?
Absolutely.
As a researcher, as someone who runs the center, what are the things that you want people to hear about how we create a more peaceful world?
I've had a very mixed career, and I've reached a place where some really strange people have given me the responsibility for developing the center and for them being inspirational. But I think there are some really very simple wins. At the moment, I'm doing research personally, and I'm writing more and more about identity. It's about who I am, who you are, who you think I am, who I think you think I am, because this is the business of relationships, largely in our contemporary world, that we present ourselves in a certain way, in a way that we want to be seen and met.
And that's also, we present ourselves to ourselves.
Yes.
Right? I look in the mirror and do I see someone who's kind or do I see someone who's just? And sometimes those go on the continuum of I'm protecting my family from those versus I'm welcoming precious souls.
So if you go back to, we talked about a minute ago, that I'm interested in this battle between the forces of prejudice and the forces of pluralism. I think we don't help ourselves by creating too much focus on who we are and our identity. So my campaign at the moment is to say, can we not move from who I am to how I behave? Can we not move you from who you are, and when you look in the mirror and describe yourself to yourself and get comfortable in yourself, challenge yourself about how you behave rather than who you are. So I've looked a lot at the current understanding of identity, the politics of identity, the power that seems to be pervasive in the literature of multiple identities. So we have Irish Americans, African Americans, we have Jewish British, we have Muslim Europeans, we have European Muslims. And all these, I find, are creating more problem for us in this great prejudicial world that we find so easy. You and I talked yesterday about these emotional drivers that we have, that you and I need to belong. This is really powerful, but we also need to be different. And it's those two things, I think, are at the source of difficult relations. And I want to change those to be part of peaceful relations. If my need to be tribal and to belong to a civilization that I present and show you, I'm a white male. If that's a problem, if I problematize it and create it as a difference to you.
Because I'm a white woman from a different continent.
You're a former colonist,
Yes, you were the colonist. So that is
but you're a colonist of different kinds now. So exactly. So the work I've done recently is to look at how I can challenge this notion of multiple identities, these hybrid identities.
That was put the identities in the drink shaker and
So I came up with this notion of how do you get quickly to the point instead of being laborious, boring as I can be. This notion of cocktail identity. So when you go to a cocktail bar, whether it's a cocktail or a mocktail, it doesn't matter, you create a single drink from a multiplicity of bits and parts. And that's what we are as people. So I can describe to you all the things, the clubs, the tribes that I belong to, this notion of belonging. So I support Manchester United, the soccer team. I'm a white male. I'm an old fogey, so I'm from a baby boomer time. So, and I have grandchildren. I'm an academic. I live in London. I live in the first world as opposed to someone else. So I have a wonderful wife of many, many years. And so I have all these things which I can lay out before you. And you can be comfortable with me if you're comfortable with lots of those things. If there's a few that really make you uncomfortable, like I'm a jihadist terrorist, for example, if that was on my label.
if you said terrorist, it'd be a different conversation.
All of a sudden, the boundaries between us would be erected, and correctly, you'd be anxious because that's your need to belong to your tribe. And this is really quite an alien guy that's sitting across from me. So how can we change that? Well, we change that by my trying to present myself as Mike, as a single complex person, not a multiplicity of identities that I can mobilize some parts of which. I go to a soccer match and I wear red and I'm, it's this side, or the other night it was the Cubs and the Indians. I became a Cubs fan because I was in a cluster of Cubs fans. I thought, well, if you support the other side because you like the color of their shirt, then you might get into trouble tonight because, But actually, on a serious note, I want to mobilize our priority on how we behave. Let's try and shift the emphasis away from who we are to how we behave. I don't know when you were a mum or when I was a dad, whether you had on the refrigerator door a little chart for your kids.
I don't have children, so I'll go with it. Yeah.
So I've seen these. We didn't use them at home, but there was these little behavior charts.
Oh, you know what? I did.
If you've eaten your Brussels sprouts or you've eaten your vegetables and so forth, you get a little tick. And if you've done your homework, you get a little tick.
I actually implemented those with someone who I was helping raise a daughter because it helped us reinforce behaviors and make visible something that was otherwise not able to track.
This for me is a very simple sort of metaphor to use. What's on my behavior chart or yours and what it should be? So let me start by, when you meet someone new, do you focus on understanding them or do you focus on making judgments? You have a choice. Normally, we are encouraged in our society to take a stand, to take a position, to make a judgment. And normally our first judgments then are reformed the more we get to know them. And this is reinforced in the literature, of course, with work on psychology and in-groups and out-groups and how the in-groups create very strong boundaries and how out-groups find difficult and so forth.
Much of that is ingrained neurologically. I see someone walking down the street, it's late at night. I look to scan to see if I'm safe.
Well, the neurology is about self-defense. It's about preservation. It's your instincts for that. You will protect your family, you'll protect yourself and those that you care about. But socialization allows us to counter that, allows us to learn behavior that is more conducive to peaceful relations. I want to encourage people to think understanding before judgment. The best lesson I had, the great difference between my children and my grandchildren. I have one grandson, he's 5.5, he's my best mate. And one of the reasons I analysed, why is it that we have such fun together and we have a completely different relationship than I had with my children, who I also have a very strong relationship with, is because I don't need to have judgment as part of that relationship as much. So we go and jump in puddles, we get into trouble with his mum together, and that's because we have a relationship where we're seeking to understand each other. That's the priority. I'm seeking to learn from him. He might be 5, but he's an enormous resource. He is always learning. All the people around him are influential. So we have a relationship that's driven by understanding rather than by judgment. And it was very powerful to me. So that's the first behavior. How can you do that? Secondly, how do you cope with difference? Have you thought about this? Do you work at it? Many of us don't. There was a wonderful sequence in a very old movie, the first Star Wars movie that most people have seen. And in that, George Lucas, I think, had this amazing scene. They were in a bar, and the context of the scene was this bar full of really strange animals.
Oh, I do know this. Yeah.
And they were coming, they sat and they were discussing the next part of the sequence. So the movie was actually focusing on their dialogue. But behind them was this plethora of really bizarre people. And difference wasn't an important thing in that bar.
It seemed completely ignored.
Exactly. That's my sort of thing I have in this head. Can we get a world in which when a black person, when an Asian person, when a hooded person comes into the room, when a niqab, a fully veiled Muslim woman comes in, that we don't take an intake of breath, or when a beard, or when a rucksack, or when a, and actually we look at coping with that difference in a different way. We don't have to like people of difference. We don't have to agree with them. We don't need to set out to persuade them to be like us. We don't have to assimilate them. But we need to give them space. We need the ability in our behavior to create space for difference.
I have attended a Unitarian church for a time now, and I should never quote religious doctrine because we'll get it wrong. But what I took away and why I selected this space, and it may be just that church within the denomination, is the mantra that we cannot have peace in the world until we learn to respect the other. understanding, respect. I don't have to like, I don't have to convert to, but I have to appreciate that your view is different than mine and it is an appropriate choice for you. And getting out of then that colonization or fear.
And it's hard, but if you ask me about behaviors, then I'd like to raise awareness about this so that we find it easier, because it's not. It's very difficult. It's tricky. A lot of congregations in many different religions, they're getting better and better as we progress, but they are actually closed communities, a large number, and that you belong to it. It's very secure, very safe. Your pastor is an amazing mentor and helps you through the week. But how much promotion is there to this notion that respect is a great word? I like that very much. It's a question of finding space for difference.
And this specific organization, or again, my little part of it, seems to seek that out. We have conversations with people who think differently, and that's the intent. They've created a system or a structure around which differences are surfaced and are positive.
We have to continually go back to this notion that we need to belong, but we also need to be different. But if you layer that in a world now in which mobility is normalized, and that's, I think, part of the problem we have, not part of the nature of the challenges that we face. So now we live in a really connected an interdependent world. You sneeze in one country and you catch a cold in another. The internet, social media, low-cost travel, plus the crises that allows millions of people to just walk to another place that's safer, means that our communities are becoming more and more diverse. You can't build walls to prevent that. You can't create boundaries and barriers, because as we've seen in the world, people circumvent them. The research that I referred to earlier that we're doing in Europe on the refugee and asylum seeker crisis, European governments are generally of the view that there are people smugglers, gangs of criminals that are fueling this problem. And the research is very clear. It's actually the borders, the lack of porousness in the borders, which is causing the problem, not the people smugglers. Do you know that about 90% of the migrants that were interviewed in Europe will tell you that at some part of their journey, they paid someone to help them make the next step. So there's an industry. Who are the smugglers? They're not mafia gangs and organized criminals. They are as well. They're largely people from within the community that are trying to help. It's not a criminalized smuggling industry, simply.
It's just the Underground Railroad kind of concept.
So, you just get together and this guy knows someone over there and he can do this. Who is providing all the life jackets for the millions of refugees sitting in rubber dinghies crossing the Mediterranean? You thought about that? Well, people don't think. These were being bought in large quantities from factories in China. They're being imported, sold to migrants. These are once-use life jackets. Wow. There's a beach in Greece you can go to where hundreds of thousands of life jackets are in a big mountain. We have a globalized market economy which somehow has created a supply chain for life jackets for people.
Specifically, people being smuggled.
Yeah, in a sense. We have a world where these issues, the issues we're describing, and these forces for prejudice and forces for pluralism are more critical now than ever before. I live in London. I love London. It's great. 48% of people who live in London weren't born there. This is a hugely different place. I was talking to AJ recently, our African Union ambassador, who said that he arrived in London the other day and he couldn't recognize it. It's a very different city.
And I grew up in the DC area, in an area where there is that much diversity. I grew up with an expectation that people are going to look different.
So our behaviors, if they don't adapt, we have problems. So what happens when the nature of our community changes, not by design? There's this wonderful sociologist that I often quote because he's been really influential in my thinking, Hartmut Rosa. He's a German. And he describes the modern world as characterized by an acceleration of change. Never before has the pace of change been so quick. So it's actually not the diversity that bothers you. It's the fact that it happens so quickly.
The one I quote is Ray Kurzweil from a different lens, looking at the rate of technology change. So 20,000 times as much technology change. So we get to this, now people aren't going to die. We've got replacement organs that come out of printers.
And when you look at the data, 32% of the people that came to this conference will celebrate their 100th birthday. This is really strange, isn't it?
Yeah, so what do we do with diversity and just feeding people and the social contract? How many people think they're going to retire at 60
70% of the people who reach the age of 100 will never have lived in an age without the internet. So there's another statistic. I love these things because they feature in my work on identity. Our identity is challenged so much by these big changes. 150 years ago, there were an absolute number of photographs of images, the equivalent number created every 2 seconds now.
Wow.
So every 2 seconds, more pictures are taken than actually existed in total 150 years ago. So 9,000 images every 2 seconds on Snapchat. So what is this saying? This is saying that the boundaries between our private space and our public space are just collapsing. And so you can find out about me without this conversation, which I'm enjoying, by going online, by interrogating social media, by becoming my Facebook friend. You learn not just about how I think, but who I am, who I'm related to, and so forth. It's a scary world. And in that world, we have to do what we can to promote this notion of pluralism.
I was going to say, especially the technology, if my mindset is acceptance and curiosity, you become less other because I can learn about you. And then I walk in and this is just my friend Mike. Chelsea talked all about you yesterday, so I knew something about you, and you were presented as a good guy and a smart guy and a friend versus someone who was...
You're preparing yourself for the social relations that are going to follow, and you're preparing in a normal way. It's one that's actually fueled by prejudice rather than acceptance. And what you've done is you've relaxed all these barriers because you've got validation from others that you trust. It's interesting, isn't it?
Not to make this personal, but how would you change my behavior?
It seems that we're conditioned in a way that makes us look at the barriers and the differences rather than the common humanity and the common purpose. And very quickly you can remove these and we can become comfortable because you have validation. I have this view that there are 2 or 3 really big things in the world that we get, that we understand as important, and therefore we work at understanding them better. Let's take absolute poverty. Doesn't matter where you're from, we get the fact that it's unacceptable in the world to have the levels of poverty that we do. So the campaign and the fight against poverty is a given. We're quite relaxed about it. We get worried sometimes that this is taking a lot of our tax dollars and so forth. But there are very, very few people that will tell you that poor people are poor because it's their fault. Very few people. We get the fact that poverty is a problem. And I hope more and more we mobilize to fight absolute poverty. Secondly, climate change. Whether we're into denial or not, whether we're scientists or not, we know that something's going on and that climate change will threaten humankind. So these 2 things, poverty and climate, don't seem to be challenged. We struggle with them, but we accept that these are big things. Well, my mantra is that cultural difference is a third leg to this.
Got it.
So cultural difference, unless we cope with it in the same way that we fight poverty and the same way that we analyze the problems with climate and our destruction of this planet, will come and consume us and will be the death of us as a humankind.
Okay, so that's a huge statement, right? Which is why you're dedicating your life's work to it. Right? If we don't get this under control and we live through climate change, then this ability to navigate difference will kill us.
It will be, for me, the single most important problem that will cause us conflict. And if you look around the world at conflict, we used to think it was all about resources. So in the old imperial days, we'd go and bully people, take their resources and bring them back into our factories and so forth. We still think it's about oil, it's about energy, because it's a scarce resource. And to a large extent it is. But increasingly what we're saying is that conflict is about the problem of difference. I'm not like you. And actually, you have to change to be like me, and then we can be comfortable.
And we do that in our relationships, too, in our homes. How do I make this concrete? What can I do? If you and I run into this conference next year, I want to report back what I have done to make difference not only in those people out there, but in myself.
There's a single word that's really important, and it's inclusion.
Okay.
Inclusive leadership. This is saying we have to step up now as people of influence, if we have any, and be inclusive rather than exclusive. So how do we include people in this journey? We do it as we're doing now. We talk about it incessantly, and we encourage people to think more courageously about these challenges. The 2011, the census, the population census in Britain, Every 10 years, we go out and have a look at our demography. And it's really fascinating to look. The fastest growing statistics, fastest changing statistics are mixed marriages. So these are new families being created by people of difference joining and having babies, and their babies will have babies. So hopefully there will be a process of integration, of inclusion, which isn't driven by leaders, but we can't wait for that. And younger generations find this space for difference much easier than older generations as well.
In the spirit of making it concrete and making a public commitment. So you and I meet in Brussels next year.
Yeah.
My commitment is to find in myself where I'm excluding. When I see somebody and immediately make the assumption, I have to check and make sure they're safe.
Yeah.
But within reason. I'm still going to, when I'm walking down a dark street, not go hug the scary-looking man down the way.
No, but I have the same challenge in Brussels, in London, as I had in Atlanta here. How many people are homeless? How many people knock on your car window asking for something? And how often do we prefer to keep the window up? Now, I'm not suggesting that we embrace all this openly without thinking, because if you roll the window down, there's security issues and so forth. But don't pass a homeless person. Don't exclude in that way. Don't make judgments,
In fact,
which we do.
I used to live downtown by a park, and I knew my homeless people. And I would shop for them.
So we have a difficult world. In 2015, in the United Kingdom, for the first time, the International Red Cross distributed food parcels. What does that say? That says somehow our system has excluded people. If we go to the voluntary sector to feed people, what on earth are we doing? This is Africa, this is Asia, this is other places, not your hometown. The fastest growing industry in the United Kingdom in 2016 are food banks.
And we've got a bunch of them too.
And you've got them too.
I want people to walk away with something concrete. What can I do?
Self-examination. When you look in the mirror in the morning, obviously worry about how you look, because that will make you feel good. It's good for persons expressing self-esteem. But think also about how you and your behavior and your relationships might exclude. And then ask the question, why am I excluding? 9 times out of 10, you won't have an answer. It'll just be because, that's how we always did it. When you get into a lift, do you talk to people? Or do you look at them and make judgments about them? Or are you interested in them? It's a hugely difficult transformation that we're talking about.
This is a start, right? For each of us, changing one behavior. The multiplicity across 7 billion people, that matters.
And recognize that the more you seek to understand others, the more you understand how you exclude, the more influential or the better person you'll be. This is about making the world a better place, after all.
Thank you, Mike. This has just been a delight.